right, let's get started. So this week we are going to be talking about how to do these two borders. This one that looks like a flying geese border, and then this one that's a cat's cradle border. And I'm gonna show you the traditional method for cat's cradle, the ruler method for cat's cradle, as well as two techniques for half square triangle. It's a recap of last week. We do have a block coming up that is all half square triangles, and I have 3 or 4 different ways to make half square triangles that we'll go over in that video. But today is really going to be more about cat's cradle. So good morning. I see several of you popping in. Thank you, thank you. We had a couple of people post for last week, and remember, if you post your progress, and it doesn't have to be just the block, but the progress that you've made on it during the week before midnight on Tuesday. We're doing drawings on Wednesday. So the first thing we're going to talk about are cat's cradles. If you did our other sew-alongs, this is a recap for you. This was the same technique we used for down the rabbit hole, except this time, instead of using the XL ruler, the big guy, we're going to use the smaller cat's cradle rulers this morning. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to zoom the camera down so again you can see what I am doing, and we are going to get started. So first we're going to talk about traditional cat's cradles. And traditional this is what a cat's cradle block looks like. It's made up of a square, 2 small triangles, and a large triangle. These are all bias triangles, meaning they can be very stretchy. So when you cut these, for the background, it's a 3 7/8 inch square, and you cut it across one diagonal. And the smaller squares are 2 3/8, and you cut across one diagonal. So the first thing you need to do for traditional method is you take your square and you sew the little background triangles to it like that. So the first one we've got there, and I did bring out the pressing again because I want to talk about pressing with these. So you've got this, you get it over here. Now when you go to sew this through the sewing machine, you want to make sure that you start at the right angle corner. Don't start at this corner. I like to start at this corner. It may change for a different project, but I found they were more accurate this way. So you just start and you stitch down, and then you're going to press towards the background. And again, use the edge of your iron into the seam, and you don't want to go out here because that's all bias and it'll stretch on you. So once you have the first one sewn on, I want to make sure I have this right. This is that one. Then we need to sew the second one on. Now, a lot of times I will do this, or I will do this, I will do this. I will sew everything the wrong way, but to avoid that, always remember with these, you want to do adjacent sides. So not opposite, adjacent. I always lay it out the way it should appear, and then I flip the triangle over and align it. Then I flip the whole thing to sew through my sewing machine. And again, I start at the right angle. And on the first one, when you do this, you are not going to get, your 1/4 inch should not hit where that square intersects the triangle. It's going to be way over here. But on the second one, when you sew these on, it should intersect at the 1/4 inch. So when you're sewing your 1/4 inch, it should hit right where the 2 triangles intersect. So then you would have that part sewn. Okay, so then once we get that one on, we're going to go ahead and we're going to press it open. And now that is what we end up with. Now we need to get rid of these dog ears. And how we do this, again, I talked about this a little bit last week, is you do not want to square up out here and here. You really just want to get rid of these dog ears. These can distort by pressing and handling them, but they will relax back where they belong. So you want to take your ruler, you want to lay your 1/4 inch line right here at that point where the pink goes to the cream, and you want to trim these dog ears away, and I would trim about that much on either side. I don't go out here and don't go out here. So once you have that on there, you would just go ahead and trim your dog ears. And then you'd be ready to align this piece onto here and just sew your 1/4 inch seam, which gets you this. And then you press this open So once you get this done, then you go ahead and you use the side of your iron and you press just again the seam. You're not going all the way out. And then we need to clip our dog ears, which you can just take scissors and clip it out. And then we would have a cat's cradle block. So we got that, but that's the traditional method. And again, the cat's cradle blocks are in the border. I have the border here for you. I haven't sewn this one on because I want to show you how you pin it on. There's your cat's cradle block. And you would then be sewing them to make that outer border. All right, so now to do the ruler method. And this is my favorite method because it takes the bias triangles completely out of the picture. So the rulers, the cat's cradle rulers, tell you right on the ruler the size that you need. So finished size, for this one, the finished size is a 3-inch square. So then if I go across, I need to cut 2 2¼ inch squares. That becomes this part of the block, the 2¼ Then you need to cut 2 2¼ by 3¼ Those are going to be your backgrounds because we're going to be making 2 at a time versus 1 at a time. So it's like kind of like a half square triangle traditional method. It'll make sense here in a minute. And then you will also need to cut 1 4 by 5 inch rectangle, and that becomes the big triangle. So first row is a square, second column, second column is the background, third column is the big triangle. So the more you use it, the more familiar you get, but it does come with really great directions and it tells you what goes where. So first we would cut those pieces, which we've got here. We've got our 2 2¼ inch squares. We've got our 2 2¼ by 3 inch rectangles and our 1 4 by 5 rectangle. So first step is you sew a square to a rectangle and a square to a rectangle. Okay. And once you've done that, the next step, here's our square and rectangle, square and rectangle. The next step is you flip one of them and you put these together and you sew across the seam. You sew it like that. And you can see here, this is a good example for you guys. When you're sewing, sometimes things get distorted. Just push that up a little and that edge will align. Don't get really worried and hung up on these little tiny details because again, just a little nudging will put it into place. So once we've got those sewn, oh, wait a minute. Missing a step. Once we've got those sewn, oh, here we go, like that. Then what you need to do, it's sewn like this. You fold this in half and align these edges, and you take small scissors and you clip the seam up to the stitching, but not through it, just right up to it. And then once you do that, you can then push this down, and this up, and press it so that all of the seams on your square are going towards the background. Okay, and that is in the directions. They tell you how to do that, so it's really easy to do. So then once you've done that, then you would put the 2 pieces together. And we need to mark our back. And this is where I use a fabric pen and you use the ruler. And how you do this, I'm going to put this on this board so it's easier for you guys to see, I think. What you do is we have a 3-inch, oh, here, you say place on seam line, place on seam line. So you're going to line those 2 on my sewn lines. And then you're going to take a fabric pen, which I love these Frixion pens for this. And you're basically drawing a line on the, well, you are drawing a line following the ruler edge. Now, this doesn't have to be super, super accurate because we're going to square them up, but as close as you can get will help you out. So then again, we're going to flip it over, align the 2 pieces. And again, these are not sewn together, so this one's shifted. Align the 2 pieces, draw the line out, draw the line out. And now I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and I will sew on these drawings. So you want to make sure this line goes right through that intersection and this line goes right through that intersection. You're going to sew on those lines. And then once they're sewn, here it is sewn, you end up with something that looks like this. Okay, and then we need to cut. So what you would do is you would take on this ruler, there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance line. You can line that up with the line and cut, and then you'd flip this over and cut. Now I have a quilt called Dancing Dots. It has 150 of these. There's a lot of them. I actually just stacked them up and cut them all at once. So I would lay them out like this on my cutting mat. And I just cut because it was faster. But the correct way is to lay the ruler on, cut, turn, flip, cut. That gets you this with a little bit of scrap in the middle. And then we're ready to press these open. So again, to press, we're going to press to the big triangle. A rule of thumb when pressing, when you're trying to decide which way to press, it's like, do I press this way or do I press this way? What I consider is how many seams am I pressing up to? In this case, there's no seams. It's a solid piece of fabric. That seam is going to lay flat. If I flip it this way and press, I've got 2 seams that I'm dealing with, which is going to create bulk right here. And the whole point of pressing is to get rid of your bulk and you have everything flat. So in this case, no matter what color it is, light or dark, I would press to the larger triangle because this is going to lay flatter. So when you are doing this at home, just flip this up and feel it. Don't iron it, but feel how thick that feels versus how thick that feels. You'll know what I'm talking about. So again, we're going to take the edge of the iron, press it into the seam, and not go out to either end. And there's that. And then we have these dog ears, but we don't need to worry about the dog ears this time because this time we're going to square them up. My favorite tool for squaring things up is the Martelli cutting turntable. And this guy, he stays on my cutting table. Anytime I have to square anything up or cut templates or anything that I have to rotate, this is what I use. So then I have my block. I have my Cat's Cradle ruler. And we know we have a 3-inch finished. So we look here. We look here and the 3 inches is that line is right there. That line gets put on the square and we're going to square it up. So let me do that. And again, you saw this came from 2 squares and 3 rectangles. We didn't have to cut any triangles. So I've got that side squared off and you see how much you're trimming off. So that's why if those lines are a little bit off when you're drawing them, we have fudge factor. It's one of my favorite things about creative grid rulers is you make everything bigger and then you square it up. So in this case, on this side, you had the 3-inch square right here. There's also a diagonal that goes right across under each square. So when I rotate the block to trim the other side, we're going to use the diagonal of the 3-inch. We're going to align that diagonal with the seam of the half square triangle edge. And I align one corner, this edge right here, because this edge is squared. So I want to make sure that that diagonal line goes on my sewn line and it goes from edge to edge on the cream half square triangle part because that is already trimmed. We're only trimming away the black, the background. And then you square that away and there you go. So when I'm doing a lot of these, I'll lay them out on the Martelli turntable, several at a time. And I would go through and I would cut, and then I rotate and then cut and cut. So you can see I don't have to pick up all my pieces. I can just turn and rotate. So that's what the Martelli turntables are for. They're great. I know you can buy them on Amazon. We don't carry them, but they are all over the place. You get a cutting mat, a pressing mat, and the turntable so you can replace the cutting mat without having to replace the whole device. So that's a little commercial on the Martelli. So that's how you're going to do the Cat's Cradle blocks. And so for the quilt block this week, it has a whole border of these around it. And I'm going to show you at the end how I pin that on. So just bear with me. Before we do this border, we need to do the half square triangle border. And let me pull the block down so you can see what I'm talking about. So here is the whole block. And the border out here, there's this half square triangle border, and then the Cat's Cradle border. So we need to do half square triangles here. I'm just going to recap what we did last week very quickly. On half square triangles, there are two methods I like to use. There is the half square triangle, the traditional method, which is where you take squares and you cut them a 7/8 bigger than your finished size. So in this case, they're 3 7/8. You can use a ruler and just draw a line and sew a 1/4 inch on either side. My favorite method is to use the non-slip multi-size 6-inch Flying Geese 45 90-degree triangle ruler. It's a mouthful. It's a Creative Grids ruler, and we do have those on our website. And I align the top of the square, the side of the square, and this diagonal line from point to point. I draw my sewing line. This is the line I'm going to sew on. I flip it over, and I do it draw another sewing line, again making sure that diagonal is in the middle. Oops, and then I'm going to sew that. Once you get it sewn, you can cut it apart, so you end up with this. And then in this case, when they're even, no seams on either side, press towards the dark and trim off your dog ears. That's a real quick recap of that. The other method I like to use for half square triangles, this is my preferred method with this ruler, is I cut the strips a 1/2 inch bigger than finish. So in case I need 3-inch finish, cut the strips 3 1/2. I lay the ruler on, I line the top, the side, and the line at the bottom, and I cut. And I have layered up the two pieces so I don't have to mess with this. It can go right over to the sewing machine, and I can sew on my diagonal and end up with my half square triangle. I like this method better because I can use all my 1/4 inch guides. I use less fabric. It just feels like it goes a little faster, and with this ruler it's a snap. So those are a quick recap on half square triangles. So the next thing to talk about is, I think I need to bring you back up to me. All right, so here is our quilt again, our center block. So you can see it up close and personal. The next couple of weeks, from here on out, all the blocks are 12 inches. They're not this big monstrosity, so they'll be a little easier. So this one, you can see on this side, there's the half square triangles, and you sew 2 together to make a Flying Geese. Then you have these Cat's Cradle blocks. You have one in the corner that go with the half square triangles, and then you have a whole Cat's Cradle block border out here. So you may be asking yourself, why didn't she do Flying Geese? And it was just a personal preference that day. I wanted to do half square triangles. I think because there's a lot of them in the quilts, and I wanted to kind of keep the techniques. I try to keep the techniques down to a minimum on most of my projects. This one has a lot of them in it because of the way it's designed. But you know, if you wanted to replace these with 3 1/2 by 6 1/2 Flying Geese, that's totally up to you. The pattern is written though to have half square triangles. So now we have to put our borders on. So we put the half square triangle border on first, then we do the Cat's Cradle one, which is this one. And I wanted to talk about how you put a border on to sew. So I'm going to show you, when you go to line up your borders, I'm going to pin this here so you can see it. Alright, so when I go to pin a border onto my quilt, anything bigger than 12 inches, I will pin. I will always use pins because your machine has feed dogs on the bottom, and the older machines do not have dual feeds. A lot of the new ones do come out with dual feeds, so you don't need to worry about it as much, but older machines, the feed dogs are grabbing the bottom fabric and the top is just sliding through, and that is 2 different tensions, and it can grab the bottom faster than the top sliding through, and you can get added fabric in the top piece. If you don't pin, if you just sew it on and cut it off. So I always pin to avoid a ripply border. That's what you're going to end up with, is a ripply border. So once we have that pinned on, I pin top, I pin bottom. Then I will align my seams here right in the middle. So I make sure that the seam of this and the seam of the one behind it go together. And then I go back and I match up each seam point and I pin. And I love to use these magic pins. They're super, super sharp. And they're very, very easy to use. They're also easy to draw blood. But let me show you how we would do this. And I want to talk a little bit about pressing as well. So on here, for the half square triangle border, I pressed all these seams open, okay? For the Cat's Cradle border, I just pressed them all in one direction. You can press them all open, but I felt having this seam open and this seam pressed would give to one side, gives this whole section a little more strength. So that's why the two different pressing methods. Let's see if I can turn you back down so you can see how I pin. So to pin this guy on, you line it up, make sure it's going the right way. You flip this over. I align the two half square triangles on this end, drop in my pin, and then I go to the other side. I don't want to burn ourselves with our iron. And I would drop in another pin. Again, I'm aligning the half square triangle and that first seam. And I know this is kind of beginner stuff, but if you haven't had a teacher show you this, you may not know this. So now we're at the center. And you see here, this piece, that point, that black triangle point is where we need our seam to go. So that point should be 1/4 inch from the edge. And so I align this and I drop in the pin at that point to hold the center. Then I go to this side and I start aligning that back seam with the front seam. And I just pin right next to it. I don't pin through it because, again, you don't want to pop your seam. And we just pin them along. This will make sure that all your points match. This will make sure that the border is where it needs to be. And it will make sure that it looks really nice at the end. So I left that one off just so I could show you how I do it. I hope that helped. And let's move on to the next part. So if you are doing the whole quilt, you would make all these flying geese. Okay, this would make, you make all the half square triangles and put that border on. You make all the cat's cradles, you put that border on. You will have the center done for the middle of the Dutch Wonderland quilt. If you are doing the 12-inch quilt block tutorials, what I would suggest for that is, again, last week I showed you, I gave you the cutting to make this block. Okay, so this is this huge block done as a 12-inch block, so we can use that in our block, our 12-inch block quilt, if that is the route you choose to go. And then if you do the cat's cradles and you're doing this route and you don't need them as a border, I did a cat's cradle half square triangle block. I took 4 half square triangles, the same size as you would use here, and I made 12 different cat's cradle blocks. And you'll notice I have 2 purple, 2 yellow, 2 green, 2 pink, because you get 2 from each set. And I made this little guy. And I will post a picture of this guy in there so you can see it. You would take the cutting from last week and you would only need to make 12 cat's cradles and you would need to make 4 half square triangles. So there's 2 blocks for our 12-inch block quilt, which is at the end. I'm going to do a layout because now we will have 9 blocks, which will make it so much easier to lay out a quilt versus 8 blocks. It will give us 3 by 3. The color going on here, huh? All right, let's see here. let's see, Glenda asked, when making your half square triangles, did you press to the darker fabric? Yes, if you're just doing half square triangles, I tend to press to the darker fabric. You could, actually, let me take that back and show you another trick. You could, because I know I'm sewing them into a flying geese, you could press half to the back, or in this case, half to the green and half to the raspberry, and then when you put the two together, they'll nest. If you don't want to mess with that, that's just like another pressing tip, but if you want these two to nest when you sew, press half of this to the green and half to the purple. If you just want to press and move on, just press everything to the dark and you'll be good. It'll work for you. If you're watching and you're just jumping in and getting started, to enter for next week's drawing, you can post your fabric swatches onto the swatch page, which looks like, I know I have one, there we go. This, if you're just starting, you can do this. You could show us your center block, which is right here, or you could show us this block or the borders on this. So you have 3 different things you can do to enter for the drawing next week. Make sure you tell your friends about this, and I appreciate everybody following along, and I hope that you have a very, very good week, and I will see you next week. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.